today, there was a column and article that stirred things up, and it came from the Dallas Morning News, written by our good buddy Calvin Watkins.
Yes, the great Calvin Watkins from the Dallas Morning News, part of, honestly, before the Luka Doncic trade, the biggest trade in the history of Dallas sports, when he and John Machota were traded for each other at the Athletic and the Dallas Morning News.
And our cigar buddy from the Combine. Did you go the light, a medium, or a harsher cigar there, Calvin?
I go for strong. I need strong. I got a lot of stuff going on in my life. I need something to calm me down.
Hey, it'll give you a nice little high on there. It'll give you a nice little high. So we had Calvin hanging out for us in Indianapolis. Do the Cowboys have a Micah Parsons problem? Take us inside the article, Calvin.
I think the purpose of the article was to raise this question because there are some issues with Parsons. And I think they do have a problem with Micah Parsons that they have to kind of fix, and they're fixable. The biggest problem is it seems as if there are people in the organization and it's in the locker room that might have a problem with Micah doing an in-season podcast. Last year, Malik Hooker mentioned it. And then this year, before DeMarcus Lawrence left for Seattle, well, after he left for Seattle, he said, hey, spend less time on Twitter and spend more time on trying to win. I thought it was a little unfair to say that to Micah because DeMarcus Lawrence was also part of the 30-year Super Bowl drought. So there's some issues with Micah's in-season activities that have to be addressed. And when you have two players saying it, I think there's more players that care about it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then the other part is the voluntary workouts. Like they get 90% attendance, 90% plus. And Micah Parsons is not among that 90%. Now, yes, it is voluntary. And who wants to work when it's voluntary? However, if you want to say you're a leader of this team, then you take your behind to the star and you work out. Dak Prescott was in the contract talks, and he showed up. CD Lamb showed up. Not last year, obviously, because he held out, but before that, he showed up. And I'm sure he'll show up in a couple of weeks. So Zach Martin showed up, unless there's a contract issue. So you want to be a leader, you have to show up to these things. And I think Micah is open to doing that, but the team is going to address it with him in contract talk. Now, there's something they can't put in writing because that's against the CBA. However, I think it's going to be suggested, hey, man, get your behind in here when we open up the doors officially.
Calvin, you've been doing this for a long time. You've covered a lot of players and teams. How big of an issue do you think the podcast thing is, and why would it be one? Is it a distraction? Do you think Micah is taken away from his actual football by doing this? How big of a deal is it?
I would say it's not a big deal because you can do whatever you want on your off day, right? You can go drinking all day on Tuesdays, which is the player's off day, and then as long as you come in on time on Wednesday morning and you're prepared to play, what's the big deal? However, there's this, as I think all of us know, sometimes perception is reality. The optics doesn't look good. So sometimes you got to say, you know what? I'm not going to do this because there's a perception that it could be a problem. And some of my teammates think this is a problem, so I'm not going to do it. Paul George, who plays for the Sixers, he did an in-season podcast, and he said, you know what, I'm not going to do it anymore because now people are talking about this instead of the main thing. That's basketball. So he stopped doing it. And everyone's different. The old school in me says, don't do it.
Yeah.
Get ready to play football every week. On Tuesdays, go bowling. Tuesdays, take your girl out. Do something, but stop talking about the NFL on Tuesdays. So everyone's got their own way of doing things.
Calvin Watkins, Dallas Morning News here on The Fan.
So is it the time he is spending on the podcast or the fact that he's talking about other teams, other players, and this team? Because, to me, if you're spending 2 hours on the podcast or you're going bowling for 2 hours, there's no difference in that. The only difference is that one is public and then the other one you can kind of hide away from.
I think it's a little bit of both. But mainly you're doing a podcast and you're talking about other teams. If you guys remember, he would come on Skip Bayless's show when it was on FS1, and then Skip criticized Dak.
Yeah.
And then there was a big hype of, oh my goodness, here comes Micah, and then Micah canceled, right? Because he knew, hey, I'm getting paid by Fox, and now I'm gonna get into it with Skip defending Dak, and that would become a bigger story, right? So he didn't do it. So that's an example of why you don't do these things, because things happen. You know, your quarterback throws 4 interceptions, and you got this podcast. People want to know what you think about it. You know, it's one thing after a game because that's part of the job. It's another thing to say, I'm going to continue to talk about this thing on Tuesday. So I think it's a little bit of both, as I said, and the Cowboys really can't control it in a sense, but maybe they can.
Calvin, how would you describe Micah Parsons' personality and leadership in the locker room and the Cowboys' satisfaction level with it, if you had to guess?
Mike is a good guy. He's a good dude. He's a young guy. You know, he's got money, you know, and, you know, when you get money for the first time, you want to, you know, spend it a little bit. It's okay. It's natural.
Yeah.
But he leads in a different way, right? He would say, hey, we're going to be in Oxnard, California for 24 days, so I'll bomb my guys then, and that's where I'll show my leadership. Others will say leadership starts when the captain's workouts start in the spring. And Zach Martin, who recently retired, mentioned that. One of the things they didn't mention in the story that we wrote was when Zach Martin, who's probably going to the Hall of Fame, one of the most decorated offensive linemen in the history of the Cowboys, didn't mention Micah Parsons in his speech. You know, Micah Parsons was not there. You know, a lot of players were there, including DeMarcus Lawrence, right? I'm not saying that there's something going on with Zach and Micah. I'm not saying that at all. But when here's one of the most decorated players in the history of the game, he has like these 3 pages of copy written out about his retirement, so meticulous, he doesn't even have your name in there. And he mentions a lot of players.
Yeah.
You know, that says something. That was eye-opening to me. I was like, he didn't mention Micah. You know, mentioned Dak, mentioned CD, didn't mention Micah, right? Mm-hmm. So it was interesting, but I think some of these things can be worked out. I don't think it's the end of the world type of thing. I mean, look, I covered Terrell Owens when he was here, right? I covered Des Bryant, you know. So there have been other guys who've been a little more combustible than Micah. You know, Jay Ratliff, all these guys. They're good guys. They're just a little combustible. So, but it can be worked out, I believe.
Calvin Watkins from the Dallas Morning News joined us here on 105 through the Fan. You said it can be worked out, you believe. Do you think this is something that rises to a level as an issue that it's going to be something the Cowboys talk about with him in his contract negotiations, that they'll address some of this? Hey, are you fully locked in, or do you have the best relationship with your teammates all the time? Do you think that's something that they'll broach with him?
I think so, yeah. From what I was told at the Combine, they are going to talk to him about, hey, you want to be a leader on this team? Get your ass to the facility when it opens up. I think he's got a good relationship with players in the locker room. You know, him and CeeDee Lamb are very close. When Micah and DeMarcus Lawrence were going at it on Twitter or X or whatever we call it now, Wanye Thomas defended Micah. You know, so there are. I mean, it's not like it's 98% against Micah in the locker room, right? But it's clear that I'm sure there's some players in there that are like, hey man, what's up with this podcast during the season, bro? You know. And I think that's something that has to be addressed. And yes, as I said, he comes prepared, he comes in shape, he's all of those things. But as you guys know, when you are going to command one of the highest contracts in the league, you got to do a little bit more.
So do you think if the team went to him and said, hey, here's your $45 million, but the podcast is gone, I guess, would Jerry even want him to cancel it because, you know, the publicity? But do you think Micah signs up for that?
Oh, yeah. If they say, look, we're going to give you $45 million, you better tell Bleacher Report we're done, it's done. But I don't think the Cowboys would do that. I think the Cowboys would say, be mindful of what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, because look, it's drawing some attention here. Now, I agree with you. Jerry doesn't really care per se because all publicity is good publicity, right? But, you know, by him not showing up to the voluntary workouts last year, Mike McCarthy was a little, hey, what's going on here, bro? You know?
Yeah.
I remember when he hired Mike Zimmer as the new defensive coordinator, Zimmer hadn't talked to him yet. And I don't know if Zimmer was upset But you could tell Zim was like, you probably need to be here so I can show you some stuff, right? But it's okay. It's okay. Being a pass rusher is not that complicated, right? Ready, hut, go after the quarterback. It's not brain surgery here, But there's some philosophy things, certain down, distance situations, we do different things. So there's some things you need to know, right? So just be there.
Calvin, do you have any doubt that a deal gets done? And what did you think of any of the trade talk regarding Parsons?
I don't think the trade talk was legitimate discussions. The people that matter, and that's Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, Will McClay, and the head coach, whether it be Mike McCarthy or now Brian Schottenheimer, I don't think they ever seriously thought about trading Micah Parsons. I think the trade talk came from lower levels of the organization that, hey, maybe we trade him and get 3 first-round picks. Well, yeah, you will get 3 first-round picks. Micah Parsons, sure. but what are you trying to do? If you do that, you're saying we're rebuilding because might as well get rid of Dak Prescott, might as well get a CD Lamb, because you are rebuilding, right? I've always been a big believer you don't trade away talent, right? When they traded Amari Cooper a couple of years ago, I thought that was, me and Stephen Jones talk about this all the time. I thought that was a mistake. You just don't trade talent. You try to work it out as best you can because we have in Micah's case, he's a generational talent. You got to keep him around. Now, if you're trading one generational talented player for another, okay, fine. That's cool. We're getting equal value here. But that's not what you do. So I don't think the trade talk was legitimate at all.
Calvin Watkins, Dallas Morning News. The Cowboys have a Micah Parsons problem. I know you got this. We get this all the time. It's infuriating. Bobby is probably going to go off on it later in the show. What do you say when you get the, how much are you being paid? Here comes the hit piece, Calvin. What Jones timing? They're using you as the mouthpiece to bring down his value. What do you say to that person?
I say it's not true because he's going to get his money either way. And Micah has said during the season, do you want 38? Do you want 40 million per year? And Micah said, I just want enough for a lake house. David, you know what I'm saying? David Muguleta, who is Parsons' agent, I'm sure is looking at the numbers and saying, Myles Garrett, that's pretty good money, So, the Cowboys knew the story was coming, right? You give them a heads up, say, hey, this is coming out, and that kind of thing. And they thought the story was fair. Obviously, I'm going to think it's fair because I'm biased, right?
Will Micah be upset with you the next time you see him?
I don't think so. Because if Micah saw something, that's the great thing I like about Micah. If he sees something he doesn't like, he's going to say something about it.
Yeah.
On X, or he'll see you in the locker room and give you one of those looks, right? And then he's an adult. He'll talk to you about it and he can work it out or whatever. So Mike was cool. But in terms of what you asked me about, did the organization say you should write this? No, it doesn't work that way. Even though I did see some people mention that on X. But it's like, no, y'all crazy.
Calvin, the $50 million question is, why free up all this money if you're not going to spend it? What's your answer to that with how the Cowboys' free agency has gone so far? And what did you leave the combine thinking with the draft coming up?
The Cowboys open up a lot of space for a couple of reasons. They look at the present and the future. So opening the space, they go, okay, we're going to sign a lot of guys in free agency. And there were a lot of small contracts for 1 year. I think Solomon Thomas, the only guy that got a multi-year deal of all the free agents they signed. I think it was 10 free agents they signed. So they free up space for that, and something might happen during the season. Oh, my goodness, we could trade for Amari Cooper, and then boom, like they did a couple years ago, right? And absorb some of that money. And here's the funny thing about the NFL's cap space. You can carry over some space to the next year, right? So Micah's going to get his money this year, but the big hit will come next year. Then there's this guy named, I don't know if you've heard of him, Tyler Smith, he's going to get paid a big money deal because the guard market is rising in the NFL. And Tyler Smith is one of those guards. I remember running into his agent and I said, hey, man, you in the lake house? What's going on here with Tyler Smith, right? And he's like, you know. So you got to pay him at some point. So you're clearing up this space to carry over to the next year because you know Micah's going to take a big hit next year because that'll be the first year of his contract. And then at some point, you got to take care of Tyler Smith. And then, hey, if DeRon Bland has a fantastic year, the cornerback market has gone up too. And I don't think DeRon Bland will demand that amount of money, but he becomes a free agent. So you got to take care of him. And then you got 10 draft picks, and who knows what you might get if you trade 2 picks for a player or something of that nature. So it's a complicated formula that works in the NFL. So when you hear about, they clear up all this space, well, it's for a lot of different reasons.
Love it, man. Thank you so much. Keep enjoying the harsh cigars, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Harsh cigars. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The great Calvin Watkins joining us here on the D&M Leasing Hotline, 105.3 The Fan.